Hi, welcome to the Built to Thrive podcast. This is our first episode. I'm your host, Lisa Myers. I'm an Ayurveda health counselor and a former construction worker. And this is a new journey for me. And I invited my friend and teacher, Cara, to the podcast today. Cara's been teaching me intuitive development for probably like 4 years now, I think, 3 or 4 years. But Cara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. And I just think it's so beautiful that you are creating this beautiful bridge between these worlds that I think can benefit from one another so much. So I grew up actually in both of these worlds, in spirituality, my mom being a really spiritual, very intuitive person. And I grew up in the trades. My family owns a business called Blue Ox Millworks and Historic Park. It's in Northern California, and it's a living history park. And at the same time, it's a working mill, and they build all sorts of custom millwork that goes on Victorian homes, mostly doors and windows. And they do a lot of restoration projects. They ship all over the world. And there was recently a TV show about my dad on Magnolia and Discovery Plus called The Craftsman, so people can see what I'm trying to explain because it's a pretty inexplainable place. So I grew up in all of that. I grew up swinging a hammer instead of learning how to throw a ball, and then got into the personal development spiritual world when I started battling depression in my late teens, and that became my life path, really. But this has all been a big part of who I am.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to tell about what you do now?
Yeah, so for the last almost 20 years, I've been teaching intuitive development, which is the best way to describe, really. It's classes on meditation, connecting with your intuition, energy work, learning how to move energy in your body and around your body. And all of that sounds really, really woo, but actually, when you get into it, is super practical. If you've had the experience of hanging out with a person or going into a group or going even to like a construction site and something about it feels off. The place feels stressful, or the person feels ick, or you feel heavy or stressed, angry afterwards, and you're like, why? Just like that person or that energy just rubbed up on me. So this is one of the tools we practice, is the ability to like get rid of all of that energy, or when you're feeling really frazzled and spaced out and ungrounded and unable to focus and kind of frazzled and frantic and stressed. We teach the ability to like ground and get calm, and you and I both did that right before this. So there's all of these really practical things that are included in what essentially is really a very woo concept and field.
I'm really glad that you brought up how your mom was very intuitive and your dad is a builder, because I didn't think about that before we started this, because I was thinking more about your background with the helicopter school and all of that. But you're right, you have been part of these two worlds. It's perfect that you're here with us on the first episode. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm honored. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, let's see. Could you share how your journey began at the helicopter school and about your role there, and eventually how that you kind of started your business and made a transition eventually? We'll start out with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back a little ways. I grew up, met my family's business, and then went straight to working there after high school. So, and of course in the summers always. And I, for about 10 years, worked at the family business and did every role imaginable there, and worked my way up to being sort of like a general manager, helping with kind of everything and oversight with my parents. Eventually I moved in my mid 20s out to Hawaii, and I worked a few different jobs, and then landed this job at a small helicopter school where they're teaching people how to fly and get a license. And it was a really growing business. I came in to run their office as their office manager, and in doing so, worked my way up to becoming the general manager of the company, which by the time I left was really pretty big and impressive, I think. And I worked there for almost 13, 12 years. So those were like the two big long business, working in business and business administration and even education that I was in, simultaneously, I was going on my own spiritual journey, which was just a big part of who I was, starting almost about the same time. It was not too far after high school that I started into this clinical depression I couldn't find a reason for, and began this spiritual journey. So the two were, one was just this quiet thing I did, and people would be like, you meditate? You talk to your higher self? What is all this? Like, they would get curious, and I would just not talk about it a lot because I didn't want to freak people out. But if they asked, I would share. And people started asking me, like, can you teach me that? Can you teach me that? And I would be like, no, no, no. Can you talk to my higher self? I mean, yeah, technically. Okay. And I always say that I built a business on accident because I didn't know I was building a business. I didn't have any intention to be a teacher. I was like, I'm the happiest, most reluctant teacher there ever was. It was like this divine jolt of lightning one day, driving down the street, and I just sat upright in my car and I spit these words out of my mouth that I didn't come from me. And this was not the way I received information. Never before or since has information come to me in this way. So it was very, very, very clearly on purpose to be this like different thing where I sat up and I said, I have to teach a meditation class and Jamie has to be there. And I was in my car alone, and I just pulled up to a stop sign and I looked around immediately to see if anybody had seen me, because I was like, that was so embarrassing. What was that? And it was so embarrassing. Like anyone's going to know. I mean, right? I could be talking to anyone or anything. It doesn't matter. And then I had to reach out to my dear friend who I did not know if she was aware that I meditated and was a psychic and did all these woo things, nor did I know if she wanted to learn any of the things. And I was like, had to awkwardly ask her. And she was like, oh, I've been dying to learn meditation. Thank God, this is the perfect time in my life. Yes, I desperately need this. So we got a couple friends together and I started teaching, and still totally oblivious. I went on to do that for years. I'd been teaching in my house, just get out some folding chairs, and we had a little room and we'd all get together. At first I was teaching in my studio apartment, move the couch out of the way, set up a couple folding chairs. And I had no idea I was building a business. It never occurred to me. I probably would have freaked me out. So it was probably better to not know. Sometimes the scope of things, like, we're not even ready for that. So it was easier to just have this be this little side thing I did. I'd teach a class or a series. They started out as 4 weeks, and now the class I teach the main one is 5 months long. And so I go on and teach this, and then eventually people would circle back around and be like, hey, can you teach that class again? Hey, I want to bring my friend. I want to do that class again. Hey, so-and-so needs to learn from you. And it was just this thing that was building. However, some years in, and I was working at the helicopter school through all of this, and some years in, finally, somehow, like, I was getting these like little nuggets of like, hey, maybe you could lead retreats. Well, that would be amazing. What's that like? I don't know. Maybe you could do this. And maybe if you did these things, and have you thought about this? And so I was doing readings and I was doing these little things, but none of it did I see as being financially viable enough to actually support me. So it never occurred to me that it could be something like that. And eventually I had this realization where I was like, oh my gosh, this could actually be a business, not a little side thing that is fun, but something that is a career. And then even then I went on to continue my day job while this was growing. I didn't have any, as you and I have talked about, there's a couple of ways to like enter into, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to do a side business. And one is just like rip off the Band-Aid and dive in. And sometimes that's the right avenue for people. And one is, some kind of a more gradual thing. And I grew up in financial struggle. So I was like, hard pass that I'm going to, I was in my 30s at the time, that I'm going to like sell my house and live on top ramen on someone's couch. At this point in my life, in my 20s, yeah, sure. But now I like to have a level of comfort, at least some level. And I know well enough to know that the universe can orchestrate this, if I'm patient, in a way where I can maintain a level of comfort. And so you tell me, divine, you tell me, I'll keep following the breadcrumbs, higher self guide me along the way. And I will just continue to do my best at loving my job and building my business gradually. And you tell me when it's the perfect time. And then eventually that point did come where there was a really beautiful transition.
Yeah, you have been such a big inspiration to me since we met, because I've had this concept for my business. And when I met you, I was like, oh my gosh, she's done it. And like, it's beautiful. And people are so enthusiastic to refer you. I mean, I refer you to people all the time. I share your podcast to everyone. You know, some of the conversations that we've had over the past few months, I guess, is it has reminded me that I don't have to struggle. Like, so many people will say a business is only going to be successful because it has to be, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I feel better because when I went back into solar, there was a time where I thought I was never going to go back into construction, never going to go back into solar. And then when I ended up there again, I fell in love with it. And I got to the point where I was like, I don't even care if I don't start my business for years. I want to be here. This is what I want to do. And now I'm realizing like I can do both. And it doesn't have to be this stressful thing that I've created in my mind. I mean, there will be hiccups here and there, but there are two things that I love and I can pursue them both.
Exactly. And I think that this idea that we have to only be so specific in one thing, or that there's this like your passion has to be your job, has to be your work, and has to be the only thing that you do. But also, how boring. I have my business, and I'm a mom, and I help support my husband's business, and I help support my family's business, and I dabble in like every little thing I can get my hands on when I have the availability, which is not a lot, but when I can. It feeds all of those different passions in me. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I still, 8, 9 years later, miss the helicopter school. I still miss it. I still talk to my old boss and we reminisce. And there are pieces of that world that I can't recreate. They're just different in what I do now. You know, the parts of it that just aren't the same. And I still miss all this time later. I still have dreams about it and I still miss it. So I think there's a really beautiful way to create a life where you get to do multiple passions.
Mm-hmm. I love the way that you put that. I would like to hear more about the very beginning where you were dealing with depression and you got into intuitive development and basically healing yourself. How did that kind of come together, I guess?
Yeah. Well, that was thanks to my mom. I was weighing in this like, sadness and pain that was like come out of nowhere, and it's hard to understand really, especially when you're young, and then decipher. And finally I was like, something's not right. Like this is a really, you're not supposed to like violently sob for 4 hours on the regular and be like hiding it from the world and like have these like feelings like you don't want to be here, really repetitive. Something's not quite right. And I reached out to my group of close girlfriends and I was like, this is a thing. And my phone I have sitting in front of me because the baby's at daycare for emergencies. And as I said that, my phone lit up with a text message from one of those friends who, at this point in the story I was about to say, one of them broke my confidence and told her mom because she was like, this is a problem. That friend just, as I said that,
Wow.
texted on my phone. And thank God she did, because then her mom called my mom and my mom was like, hey, you got to talk to me about this and like, let's get you some support. And so everybody kind of rallied around to try to help and figure out what was going on. And so I went into it in a rather woo way. My mom was like, what would you like? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, I had just heard about this woman who does readings, like psychic readings in the next town over. Do you want to go see her? And I was like, yeah, okay. And I grew up with like, we'd go to the doctor, but we'd also go to a healer, and we'd do we'd use all the modalities. And I don't know what it was, my mom's intuition that was like, this is where you need to go. But I went in, I had a reading of this woman. She told me all this beautiful information. I was like, okay, but what's this depression about? And she was like, honey. And I assumed there was some deep, dark, hidden, like messed up thing, or like trauma that I didn't know about, or like, some horrible thing was going to be there because I couldn't find a reason for this. And she was like, baby girl, the chemicals in your brain are off. We just need to get you some support. And here is the name of the best psychiatrist in the county. And I was like, what? Aren't you supposed to not tell me that, but like tell me? And she's like, and you would definitely benefit from learning meditation and some tools. I have a class that starts tomorrow. It's full, but I will open up an extra spot for you. or maybe it started a couple days later. I don't know. And I was like, okay. And I knew that was a big yes. I knew both of those things were a big yes. And then I was so depressed and devastated that I couldn't even get out of bed when the class came around and I wasn't going to go. And my mom, in a very my mom like way, because has let me quit a good jillion things in my life. All through growing up, I quit fucking everything. I should have asked you if I could swear on your podcast.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. I have a sailor's mouth. So I quit everything as a kid. And she was like, no, I don't want to do this for these reasons. And she'd be like, okay, did you try? Okay. Well, she came into my room and she was like, get up, you're going. Here I am on the bed, like, can't even stop sobbing, like, want to. The blackness, it's like physical pain. It was awful, awful. And something about the way that she said it, she doesn't remember this. And she's like, can't believe I would. She was like, get up, here's your keys, go. And it was enough that it jolted me up. I think both our higher selves in that moment were like, this isn't urgent, you must go. And I cried all the way there. I bawled my way up the stairs. I got into the chair. And then she taught this class. And in these meditations, I wasn't in pain. The depression was gone while I was in the class, while I was doing the meditations once we'd started. And then I didn't want to leave because I knew as soon as I walked out the door, eventually that was going to hit me again. And so I just loitered in the class, and I wanted to go give her a hug, and I never wanted to let go because she felt like a lifeline. And she was this really large woman and she felt like a Buddha, and I wanted to burrow in her lap and never leave. So I also made the appointment with the psychiatrist, and I had this dual line of the Western side of it built a floor for me, with medication, and that would keep me from going all the way too low. And then the energetic side of things that I was working, the woo side, is how I learned that I am a ridiculously sensitive empath, and I'd been picking up everybody's stuff my entire life without any way to protect or filter, or how much of the energy of Cara was actually Cara was this much because I'd taken on so much and I was breaking underneath it. That was really the cause of all of this. I learned in that I have all of these gifts and how to use them. And first I had to learn how to turn them off, how to stop being so overly sensitive all the time, which is a hard thing to do when you're this sensitive. And it was a long journey. It was 5 years. I call them my traction years. 5 years of constantly changing medications because we were always trying to figure out how to support with the medication and therapy, and this deep journey into the spiritual and eventually healing everything. And so for me, it saved my life very, very, very clearly. No exaggeration there. Saved my life. And I have so much appreciation and reverence and understanding for how important and powerful it is. So to be able to share this with 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 people, I don't care. If I can share this with the people who need it, feels like such a gift to me.
So much of it is I guess there are times where I'm still trying to figure out. I feel like my gifts are still coming online, and
yeah,
so much of it is visualization, but a lot of the time, I guess it's clear cognizance. I just know what's going on with. Usually it has to do with other people. I'll just know what's going on with someone, but it's just really cool how even on your podcast and in our classes, everybody has a different experience with how it shows up in their body or in the meditation for them. And around the same time that I met you, I also went to these women that they did something called clearing the grid for me. And I think it was right before I started working with you, actually. It was a couple of months. And they put this blindfold on me and I went into this meditation, and it was physical. My posture was different walking out of that session. And something about the way that they guided, it's kind of I had been wearing all these heavy winter clothes, and I was able to take them all off in that session. And I felt like it was preparing me to work with you because it was kind of the first kind of like when you take all your clothes off and change for gym class. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
now I'm ready. um, yeah. So I guess the question that came up for me is, how long were you doing both courses of basically treatment?
I think it was about 5 years, maybe six, probably five, like 4 or 5 really intensive years. And then, as because the depression would have highs and lows, but then it also like was getting better and better and better and better, or I guess you'd say better and better and better and better and and more steady. So in those last year or two, so probably 6 years, but maybe in the last year or two, it was much more like the study was much deeper and the depression side was sort of like just maintained. I was still on medication, but it wasn't, and there would still be hard days, but it wasn't as dire. And then I made the move out to Hawaii. So I was in a really stable place to be able to make that move, and eventually wound up getting off of the medication, which I thought would never happen. I was resigned to be on it for the rest of my life. And I wasn't in doing the work thinking I was going to be able to fix. I was just trying to survive at the beginning. And then it was like, once I understood all of this energetic stuff, how I'd been taking on energy and what it was like to be connected to the divine, connected to everything, the universe, and in a way that was really healthy in my body. And once I started to see all the ways that I'd been doing things in unhealthy ways and the detriment that it had to me, then I wanted to continue this work. Like it was so fun. I just kept going and going and going and going.
That's how I feel working with you. Like, I just want to keep learning.
Yeah, you never stop. And like you said, gifts are still coming online. I'm still learning things about myself. I think we are these like almost never ending landscapes we get to explore, right? Where I'm like, whoa, what? This little quirk that I have is actually because of this thing, which was because of this in childhood. Oh, this is so fascinating. But I can use this to be like a tool to help with the. We're incredible. And our abilities energetically, like you said, that you just know, sometimes you'll just know things about people, or you'll be able to like do a meditation and have these really elaborate, beautiful visions that mean something, and you're getting messages in all these ways. Everybody has something. We've all got, a lot of people just don't know it. But the more you play with it, it's just like learning to play an instrument. You don't pick up a violin. Almost no one picks up a violin and plays a concerto or whatever. But the more you play, the better you get, and you're not going to stop getting better. You're going to continue to find new layers and new sensitivity in whatever it is that you're continuing to practice.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's kind of like you're learning to translate not just one new language, but like, between the visualizations. And for me, like, I guess I don't think that I don't call myself an empath, but I've started to notice in the last year, like, oh, if I don't set the intention and do everything I need to do before I go into a certain room, like I do pick it up. And it's a lot easier for me now to recognize it and kind of, help that energy fall off of me, I guess you'd say. But it's a whole new language. And sometimes that's why, like, when people are like, I don't believe in psychics, it's like, it's not about a psychic who knows everything. That's just somebody who is practiced in interpreting and translating the energy. And just like from English to Spanish or English to Chinese, like you can get the message across. But sometimes you're going to misinterpret something, or you're going to get 80% of the message instead of 100%.
That's a great explanation. Yes.
Yeah. What inspired you to move to Hawaii? Going back to that.
Oh, that was not idea at all, which is so funny because people meet me and they're like, wow, this is your home. I'm like, yes, this is my home. My soul is very happy here. And yet never, I'm not a big dreamer. I'm good at creating a big life by letting it come, but I'm not a good big dreamer. And I never thought about going to Hawaii. I never thought about I didn't like tropical places. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and I really wanted to leave home, like my home county, and go explore. My partner at the time did not want to leave. And so we were like at odds about that. And some friends of mine had moved out to Hawaii and were getting married and said, "You're one of our bridesmaids." And so we up and went. We did this trip to Hawaii to go be in this wedding. And I was like, I don't like it. I would never live here. It's too hot. I don't like this. I don't like this. I'm really fair and I get sunburned and I can't lay still at the beach and I'm scared of the water. And like I wasn't like I hope I wasn't a total whiny little brat the whole time or anything. But if people were asking like, "Oh, would you live here?" I was like, "No, this is really cool. And I'm having so much fun seeing like this new place, but like, no, this wouldn't be somewhere I would live." And then my partner and I got home and the next day, 24 hours later, the phone rang. He picked it up and it was our landlords. And they said, "We are tearing your house down, leveling it. You have 3 weeks to get out." And we were entrenched in this place. We had a dog and a cat and it was a great rent. And how are we going to find a place that took pets in 3 weeks' time? How are we even going to pack this much stuff in 3 weeks? What do we even do? In hindsight, now I understand. And I'm like, that was totally illegal. That was totally just like, note to my 24-year-old self, like, no, legally, they need to give you a lot more time than that. Especially after living there for as long as we had.
Where were you living at the time?
It was a really cool property. It was 13 acres and it was an old like 1950s mobile home, like trailer pop out like thing that had been sitting on the property for a bajillion years, not mobile anymore. And when the owners bought it, they bought the property with that on it and they lived in that while they built their dream home. Then when they moved into the dream home, they rented that to us. And so they had the dream home and then they had built this big garage with your builder crew will love this. They built their garage with this beautiful apartment over it. The problem was they wanted to be able to rent the apartment and they couldn't be zoned for more than 2 rentals. So they were like, "You're out." They knew that they had told us eventually we're going to tear this down. So it wasn't like we were like, "What?" But we had no idea the timeline. We'd been there for 3 or 4 years. We had no idea that it was that, like, now. So they were like, "We're really sorry. We didn't want to ruin your trip and tell you before your trip. Also, like, TikTok, can you start packing your stuff?" So my partner, who never planned to leave, hung up the phone. We were just staring at each other, like, in terror. And he tried to, like, make a joke, I think, and break the silence. And he was like, "Well, our friend said he could get me a job in Hawaii." And I just blurted out, "Yes, let's go. Call him right now."
Really?
And I don't know what possessed me. I don't know. And I tell you, girl, the dominoes that laid out for us to make that move so fast, because I remember taking off on the airplane and all of a sudden I was like, "Wait, what am I doing? What did I just do? What just happened? What?" Because it was like boom, 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 boom. All the things fell into place and it happened fast. It was a huge ordeal. It's a huge move to make, especially with pets. And every single thing had to line up for us to be able to do this, especially as like pretty broke 24-year-olds.
Yeah.
And so we got out to Hawaii and I hated it. I wasn't acclimated. I had terrible jobs at the beginning. I didn't have a good friend group yet. My dog and cat took me 8 months to get them out there because the quarantine process is so crazy and expensive. So I was super lonely and I was like, and my mom just kept saying to me, like, "You're on a working vacation. Like, I just want you to think about this like a working vacation. Just give it 6 months. Just see."
Yeah.
And right around the 9-month mark, I had gotten my pets out there. I'd made some friends, but the big thing was I got the job at the helicopter school about 9 months in to be living in Hawaii. And all of a sudden now, like, I had a social scene because of that. I had something like a job I really liked and something to sink my teeth into. I'd acclimated a little bit more to the weather. I was starting to like get more comfortable in all the things. We'd moved from this like weird little studio that was great, but also like you had to leave the studio and walk through the carport to get to the bathroom, which was the only running water.
Yeah.
Like there was
One
no
of
running.
those.
Very Hawaii, very Hawaii, and cheap. That's why we were there. It was cheap. So we were starting to get more situated and settled. And pretty soon I was like, oh, okay, this is home. I like it here. And after a while, I was like, I don't never want to leave.
Yeah. I have so many more. Okay. I don't want to jump around timeline too much from where we are. So did you worked at the helicopter school for several years and then you moved to Denver, right? We'll talk about Denver later. Okay.
Yeah. So I was at the helicopter school for 12 years and then moved to Colorado for a few years. And then now we're back in Hawaii.
Yeah. So at the helicopter school, and it's funny because when I started working with you, I was out in the field 100% of the time. And I noticed a really big change in the way that I felt about work after starting my intuitive development. And just, I had been meditating every day for a while, but getting the techniques and everything, it helped so much with not picking up all of the stuff. And it was like, okay, because normally there's always going to be some negativity at work, right? And if you have no shield to it, or you don't go in with the intention of like, I'm going to be the positive light today that I can be, you kind of get pulled down into it. And I used to always think about like, how can I get that half a day off or whatever to get out of my work situation. But once I started working with you and doing these practices, I noticed that I just started thinking of work as something that's just part of my life. There's nothing to escape from. I love it. And like, it completely changed my energy. So at the helicopter school, I guess I would like to hear, do you have any stories or examples of noticing that your intuitive work was helping at the helicopter school?
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
was just remembering you telling me in those early days how, like, the difference in how all the people you worked with were relating to you. You were like, oh my gosh, the whole crew, all the guys, like, totally relate to me completely differently. I'm getting treated totally, like, everybody's reacting totally different than they used to because my energy has shifted and it's like it's shifted everyone else's energy.
Cara, I don't even remember that. That's amazing.
Uh-huh. I remember. I'm trying to see if I could remember the specifics of like what it was. One of the things I remember you saying is they were coming up and asking you, like, okay, what are you doing differently? But people were like, people who'd been grouchy were friendly. People who'd been like not helpful were helpful. People were like, oh, let me help you do this. People were complimenting you on like, oh, you're so good at this. Instead, before they were like, you're a girl. And like, you were getting this whole different, like, you were like, how is it possible that I changed my energy and somehow it changed everybody else?
Yeah. And it was.
Yes, totally. Totally. It's that like one rotten apple can ruin a whole batch, but the reverse is also true in like people. Like
Yeah.
one really positive, like very, very grounded, aligned person can uplift a whole room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at the helicopter school, I loved working there and it was an amazing job. And it was so stressful that it put me in the hospital multiple times. I it was an incredibly stressful job. I was doing the job of multiple people at once, as is the case in small business. I took on the stress because that's what I learned how to do. And as an empath, I was like, I'll just take everything. And I took it on like it was all my responsibility and the world was ending. And it was really pretty embarrassing when I, many years in, started to understand like there was a different way of doing things and that I could have changed that all along. I did have a naturopath doctor at one point be like, Carrie, yep, job's going to kill you and you got to quit. And I was like, I can't. The business can't lose me. I'm irreplaceable. Nobody knows how to do what I'm doing here. But my health was like, it was becoming such a problem that I went in and talked to my boss and was like, my doctor told me I have to quit and I don't want to quit and we got to do something. And so we shifted my hours back to like part-time, a little bit more than part-time from full-time. So that I could start taking hours every day to go like rest and try to rebuild my whole endocrine system and nervous system and it had gotten really bad at a certain point. So, and that was like midway. Like I continued to work for a very, very long time after that. My boss would laugh. I'd have like all the pill bottles of like supplements and some prescriptions because they had to get on thyroid medication, and then all the crystals lined up and the essential oils, and like he would just tease me endlessly, but he's like, really, like seriously, keep doing whatever you're doing because you're able to keep working. So at the very beginning, I remember you remember the chakra cleaning and how long and lengthy that process is when you do like the full version of, it's one of the tools in Master Your Magic, and I teach it at the end because it's a really long one. And I would try, because I have never been a morning person. Now as a baby I am, but at that point I was not, especially with low thyroid. And so I would try really hard to make sure I had time to meditate in the mornings before work, but oftentimes I would just have time for like a quick, do the things. On the days when I didn't do the full on deal, like the whole huge deal with all the different steps and all the different pieces and every single thing, it would be a night and day difference where I would leave feeling like I'm in a face plant on the sidewalk. I'm so exhausted. I have to quit this job. I hate it. Go home and cry. And then on the days when I would do it, I would be laughing and having a great time and be like, I love this job. I love the people I work with. This is the best place. Like a psycho. Like the difference was like
radical.
And
yeah.
Very radical. And this was, I was in my late 20s, and I can't remember. I think I'd started teaching, I guess, at that point, but it was so dramatic. And it was a very small building. It was very open. We were all on top of each other. There was so much energy. And eventually it didn't take long before I became the like anchor point of setting the energy for, everyone was calling me mom, even though I was the same age or younger than a lot of people, because there was this like, if Cara can anchor it, everything would be okay. But then Cara's all stressed and now everybody's a disaster. And now we're all picking up and she's absorbing everything. And so I had to learn how to find ways to be okay in this like, be the eye of the storm and try to work and do this work that required immense thought because it was brand new to me. I was learning all of this stuff as I was going. There's so many regulatory agencies, so many. You've got the FAA and you've got the Airport Administration and you've got the accreditation body and you've got the financial aid, what they called Title IV. Anyway, there were so many organizations and any one of them could shut us down. And, you mess things up. Businesses close if you mess things up with helicopters. Like, you better be really careful something doesn't go mechanically wrong. I wasn't dealing with maintenance, but I was dealing with all of the oversight of all the paperwork to make sure everything had gotten done and turned in and everything. So I felt really an immense amount of stress. When we wrote visas, so we were dealing with, people coming in from foreign countries and lots of organizations cracking down on us all the time. It felt like lots of authority figures looming over. And I had to do all of that in this big open space with like total chaos happening all the time. People in and out everywhere, loud noise constantly, just like a construction site.
Yeah.
And it took all my tools, as sensitive as I am, it took all of my tools to be able to thrive in that environment.
Did you ever have you mentioned that your boss was like, keep doing whatever you're doing, but did you ever have any incidents with other coworkers where they're like, this is real or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. People would come into my sphere through work or through friends or whatever. And then like pretty soon they'd start to get curious and they'd be like, what's that? What's that on your desk? Why you got your eyes closed? What are you doing over there?
Yeah.
You can hide the woo so much, but at a certain point you're just like, whatever, my freak flag's gonna fly. So I wouldn't talk about stuff at work, but people would start to like, especially once I was doing it a little bit more as a business because you could see it online and you could see the things. So my coworkers would come. They'd come to my events. They'd come take my classes. They'd tell everybody else. They'd show up at my yoga class and my meditation class, and it became like even the people who maybe weren't coming to the classes because that wasn't their thing were still pretty, I very much was scared. I talk about it like it had to go slow for me because it was like layers of coming out of the closet. And I was like, at any moment, the villagers are coming with their pitchforks. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Like, what if I use that scary word psychic? People are going to kill me. Like, that's it. This is it. They're coming for me. I'm going to lose my job. I can't be this weird. Like, no one's going to respect me. But also, like, no one, if they're coming after me for sure somewhere. And
yeah,
it's never happened. It's never happened. People have been nothing but like loving and curious and welcoming. Even if it's not their thing, they're like, cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's so funny.
Yeah, so,
oh, go ahead.
It was same at work. Same at work. People were really like very, very understanding and appreciative.
It's so funny that you were like, the villagers are coming with a pitchfork, because I was going to bring up how, like, when I've been on site and I would just have all these weird herbs, and just like, I would look at something on my way out the door and I would be like, I need to bring this with me today. And then someone would need it in the middle of the day and I'd be like, actually, here you go. And I remember one time my coworker was feeling sick. So a couple of them came up to me and they were like, all right, we're going to the village witch doctor's car to get the healing potions or whatever. But it is cool. Like, I've always had the same kind of fear. And then as people get to know me, they're like, you're so calm. And I didn't realize that I was doing this, but they'd be like, when you come into a room or when you come into a meeting, the energy changes and everybody's more calm. And you calm everybody down. I didn't realize that I was doing that, but it's cool, and it's nice to know that it's not something to be afraid of, and people kind of crave it once they realize that you can support them, or just by being there, it's supportive.
Absolutely. I'm still amazed, I think, to this day, how curious and interested people are. And I think it's such a beautiful thing because if it didn't have such a weird stigma around it, I really do think this would just be a normal part of our everyday lives, that we understood just like we have the ability to smell and no one thinks you're weird for being able to smell, that you would have the ability to connect to your intuition and live with that guidance. Like, it's just like an additional sense, and everybody's got it in some way, shape, or form. And once you learn how to use it, life gets so much easier.
So how would you describe, for someone that like might have heard the word intuition but has never really connected with the word, how would you describe what intuition really is?
So if we have all these different phrases, we call it like a gut feeling, or we talk a lot about the gut. We talk about it coming from the stomach oftentimes, that like, I had a gut feeling, I'm going to gut check this, right? And I think that without all the woo language, which is, we grab because there isn't good words to try to explain this stuff. But everyone, to some degree or another, is following that intuition. And maybe for you, it feels like the smarter part of your brain or your subconscious, or it feels like a gut check. Those things where you're like, oh man, I knew I wasn't supposed to go do that thing.
Yeah.
I thought, should I go do that thing? And then I was like, oh, something was like, don't go do that thing. And then I went ahead and did it because I didn't want to disappoint the person, and it sucked. And I totally regret it. And, I overdid it, or it was a bad experience or whatever. And we have those things where we're like, I don't know why, but I feel drawn to this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I just feel this like need to do this thing. I don't know why. Or for some reason, I just wanted to take the back way to work today. And then I found out there was an accident and I would have been 20 minutes late to work if I'd gone the regular route. I'll be darned. And we brush stuff like that off and we say it's a serendipity, it's a coincidence. But if you really start paying attention to the amount of that's happening, it's more than you could ever say is coincidence. You are being supported all the time. And the better you get at hearing that gut feeling in whatever way it comes to you, the easier it gets to start to trust when you've seen the evidence of how smart that part of you is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to put it. I wanted to go back and ask you, so you were saying that it took about 5 or 6 years in when the doctor was like, okay, you've got to figure out how you're going to balance this or you've got to quit. And you said you were there for 12 years. So what was the difference between Cara burnt out, like overwhelmed, frustrated with the job, and you clearly loved it enough to where you were like, I have to find a way to make this work, versus like maybe 4 or 5 years down the road where you had figured out that balance? What did that look like in terms of habits, things that you were doing, the ways that you were handling your work schedule, whatever you want to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's an excellent question. Like, really, really genius question. So it was a lot of things and it took time. I had to learn boundaries, not better boundaries, but boundaries at all. So I started teaching everyone, don't call me on the weekend unless something's on fire. Like, I took my work email app off my phone. I worked a decreased hour schedule all the way until I was done with the job. I never went back to 40-hour week. I got support for my adrenals, thyroid. I went into therapy. I literally went into therapy, sat down, and was like, I need to learn how to take care of myself. I only know how to take care of everyone else. That was like the whole purpose of like going into therapy at that point. I started getting more sleep. I started putting more effort into hormone balance. I got support for my hormones, support for my adrenals and endocrine system. I mean, I was a mess. The biggest thing I think was learning tools for separating the stress, because that's something that nobody else can do. Like, the business itself, just by the nature of it, was going to keep putting more and more and more and more and more and more and more on my shoulders of like pressure and stress, because I was willing to take it on. And it wasn't even necessarily that I said, I need to axe 80% of my job. I kept really everything that I was doing on my plate. I started being more efficient about it. I mean, as the business grew, we hired lots and lots and lots more people as it went on, but there was still a really large job that was mine. I did have to learn how to delegate better and train people. But this shift in perspective about stress, to learn how to not take everything on like it's this life or death thing, and to not feel this ultimate responsibility like, hey, I am doing the best I can, and here's a deadline coming. And like, just so you know, boss, like, we are not in line to hit that deadline. We're all working as hard as we can. We've got to do something. Like, the deadline's got to move, or we need more, like, something's got to shift here, instead of like Cara has to kill herself trying to reach a deadline that nobody could reach, and take on this stress, right? Like, it's hard to even explain, but if you've ever had the experience of understanding what it's like to like, everything's on my shoulders versus everything is not actually my responsibility, even emotionally, I took everything on emotionally, everyone's well-being and the whole success of the company. And if my boss was stressed, I was absorbing it. If people were having interpersonal relationships, I was absorbing it. If everything. And I remember, I wish I could remember the name of the book, but someone brought me one time, one of my coworkers, she said, oh my gosh, Cara, I was reading this book and it's what you were preaching to us in our last employee meeting, and read this chapter. And the chapter talked about the train of anxiety, and the train of anxiety being, oh my gosh, what? We just got this notice. And then I run over to this person. And I'm like, oh my gosh, John, we just got this notice. Oh my gosh, they could shut us down. And then we call, and then we do all the things, and we just like ripple our way through the company with this chain of anxiety. And now everyone's nervous system is on fire. And it becomes this like drama addiction that we do as humans. I mean, how many times a day do you pick up your phone and look at the news or whatever else it is? And you're like, so we do this, like, when we're spastic about it, we're so addicted to that fight or flight
I've gotten
response.
way better at that thanks to working with you. Just a side note, like I took all the news stuff. I'm like, nope, that is not intruding on my energy until I'm ready to access it. Yeah.
Yeah. When I can sit down and be mature enough to read it for information, and when they can be mature enough to present it to me as information, then we're going to talk. When it's clickbait and I'm using it as a way to just fire myself up, what are we doing here? What's the point of that? So anyway, what I learned, and I would try to teach people this, and I was like, I am the stop engine for that train. I am the brick wall that that train comes slamming into, and I will not let it keep going. And if I'm good at my job, I take that train and I push it right back down, and I can send backwards this chain of calm. So it comes at me and they come running into the office and they're like, Cara, Cara, Cara. And I would go like, sit down, tell me what you need. Great. It's not a problem. Here's why it's not a problem. Here's why it's not a catastrophe. Here's the person we're going to call. We've dealt with this before. Like, everything's fine. I've got this. They said they were going to shut us down because the airport police have a hard on for like trying to give tickets. And I would open up my computer because I'd been doing it so long, and I would be like, here you go. I keep this saved copy of the thing in the regulation that says you don't have to have a badge to go to your aircraft. Just go hand this to them. They can't legally give you a ticket because it's in their rules. And they would be like, but it was so scary, and everything was new and scary all the time, all the things. So I would send back this wave when I got good at it of like calm, and people would walk out of my office after they came running in. People would come in and like everybody be gathered around the printer because everybody needed the things they needed to print. And it wasn't like a regular office. Like the whole business would print these receipts and things all day. And they'd be like, the printer's broken. And I would walk into the room and I'd walk up to the printer and it would start working. And this happened multiple printers, and I was like, my expectation is that this printer works. My expectation is that I can always make it work. Sometimes I'd like open a drawer, but usually I'd just walk up and the printer would be like, okay, because everyone else in the room is in this paranoia that the printer doesn't work, and they're all committed to the fact that it's broken and it's a piece of junk. Well, we just replaced it. And they'd be like, Cara, we got to. And I was like, no, this one's 3 months old. We just bought a new one. It's fine. Printer's fine. You gave it ink, you gave it paper, it's fine, everything's fine. And the world starts to respond to that. So less things would become a catastrophe because I wasn't in catastrophe energy all the time.
That is that is so cool. And it reminds me of a coworker that I had last year where we were talking on the phone, and she was like, I get woken up out of bed with phone calls of like, where is this? What's going on? Like, why don't we have this yet? And I was like, okay, you need to give yourself 15. I was like, when did the phone calls start coming in? And she gave me a time. And I was like, just put your phone on airplane mode, wake up, and give yourself 15 minutes before you take your phone off airplane mode, and then respond to all of it. And everything you're saying just amounts to really nothing is an emergency. I mean, some things are urgent, but like the world keeps spinning. And the more that we can remember that, it does create this calming effect. And even when somebody comes to me and has like very, very intense energy, it's almost like, okay, I have to go into overdrive of calm. I have to be even more calm than usual. And
yeah.
I know I keep just talking about what a great teacher you are. I didn't expect to do that today, but I'm realizing how much I appreciate you. So thank you.
I feel the same way. I think that you are just part of your nature is that you tend to be someone who is really good at that, bringing that calm energy. And I was not. I really was the like, everything is a catastrophe, everything is level 10 all the time. So I did feel like everything was life or death because that was the only way I knew how to interact with all the things. And it really took a lot of tools for me to learn how to, so it was such a great question you asked, to be the Zen, even in a space where I'm being productive and getting shit done.
Yeah, you can have a sense of urgency and have clarity and calm with it, which is really
Yes. Yes.
So another question is, how long did it take you to go from I guess the word I think of is burnout. Like when you were in that kind of burnt out state, too, feeling like, hey, I've got it and I'm balancing this, I'm handling it.
Oh, that's a great question. And I would say it wasn't linear. Maybe it took me a year or two, a couple of years or something to like rebuild from burnout, for one, like physically and energetically. And then it was like learning how to get good at it. So it would be like, oh, I wobbled over into like stress, and like how quickly can I correct myself back into a state of like calm. And then I'm doing pretty good. And then, the business would go through some new period of growth, and I would spend a chunk of time, sometimes a longer chunk of time, in this immense stress again. And I would be like, oh, I got to reassess and like figure out how to get myself back. I've taken all of this on too much. I've let it hit me too much. And I remember there being periods, even after I was really pretty good at it, there being periods of time where I would like feel sick to my stomach when I would open my email. I would get so triggered because we just kept growing. So there were always new, bigger things we were always working towards, and new intimidating things and new things to go wrong, and new like incredible amounts of money that we'd spent to go into some venture and then like have it hanging in the balance. And so I would say it was a constant like, redirection back over and over again.
Kind of recalibrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you realized, hey, like this intuitive development could be a real business, how far into your time at the helicopter school were you?
That's a great question. I probably started teaching really pretty quickly after I started at the helicopter school. And then I was probably, so maybe halfway through. Maybe it was like roughly 6 years or 5 or 6 years in where I was like, wait, am I building a business? Maybe even more, maybe 7. And then maybe it was like another 5 to 7 years before like life lined up for me to do it as my only full-time thing.
It's so cool because what you're saying is like when you started putting up boundaries and getting clarity on that and recalibrating, you were also starting to build your business, which is funny because I feel like that's kind of where I am right now too, is like, okay, this is how I'm going to do this.
Yeah. And I built it slowly at the beginning. I was really, I had to work hard too. I'm so multi-passionate. I had many projects and things going on, and I was working at my job and doing all the things. So I had to sometimes water this bed in the garden, and sometimes water this bed in the garden, and sometimes water this bed in the garden, and sometimes pour energy into this project, while maintaining my regular job and my self-care and the things I needed to keep doing. So things felt like they were growing slowly, but I wasn't really very worried about it because most of the time, I didn't feel this sense of pressure, like I have to hurry up and get out of my job. Sometimes we'd go through one of those phases I was talking about where I wouldn't be very good with stress and things would and I'd be sick in my email and I'd be like, hey, I gotta get out of here. And then as soon as I heard myself say that, I would be like, nope. We are not putting that kind of pressure on your business that it has to suddenly support you because you can't handle the stress at your job. You got to shift because you want to walk away from this job loving it, not walk away from this job miserable. Like you're not running from this job. For me, I'm not saying that different people have different experiences, and there are definitely jobs you probably should run from, I'm sure. So I would sit down and I would go through my practices to like shift perspective and change things and reset up my energetics and where had taken it on and what was I looking at improperly. And I even had files on my work computer that were like Cara's, like all the different tools and things that I would write out and change my perspective and come back to like, oh yeah, I love these people. Oh yeah, I love this work. Oh yeah, that's right. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Wow. I had a question and now I lost it. So I guess when you moved to Denver and you were saying that it was quite a bit of time before this became like your main business. When you left Hawaii, were you still in that transition? Like, did you have another job in Denver when you first moved there?
No, I didn't. I had met my now partner, and we were doing this long distance thing. It was maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months into this long distance relationship. He lived in Colorado, and um, I would start to get worried about like, how are we ever gonna, when is he ever gonna move to Hawaii? How are we ever gonna be able to like be in the same place? And then I would feel everything shutting down, and I would just remind myself like, it's above my pay grade. Universe is gonna have to figure that out. I just have to trust. Never in a million years did I expect I would be the one to move.
Yeah.
I never planned on leaving Hawaii. If you had told me, I would have been like, sorry, we have to break up. And he wanted to be in Hawaii. So when I first met him, that was like, he was like, I'm trying to figure out how to get myself location independent in my business, which he wasn't yet at the time. So one day I come home from teaching my yoga class. It's late in the evening. We'd gone out to dinner afterwards, a bunch of the crew, and I get home and I have this impulse. And that's like that, you were saying intuition. I have this impulse and it's strong. And it's like, we should do some projections in your business. You should do some financial projections for your business. Now, this is a side business. Like, the money it makes me is like fun money, right? Rarely are you sitting down to do like intense financial projections for your side gig that's just for fun.
Yeah.
But I had this like really, it was like, I want to do all this like projection and brainstorming and future planning. And it's a little bit like, if you ever have a really strong impulse to deep clean your house or do your taxes, like the things you don't like to do, you feel like you should grab a hold of that and use it.
Yeah.
Go ride that wave, because I'm not going to want to do this again any other day this year. So I was like, okay, well, it's like 9:00 at night. I need to go to bed, but okay, higher self. Like I follow the nudges. I've been doing this a long time. I know how to do this.
Yeah.
So I go downstairs into my big meditation room and I get out some like, one of the things that I like to do in my business, because I've worked in corporations and businesses for so long, is I like to make this part fun for myself. So instead of getting out the spreadsheets and the calculator and adding machine and all the things that I would have used opening up QuickBooks or like in the business at the helicopter school, I get out a giant pad of paper, they're like really big, huge ones. Mm-hmm. And I get out colored pens or pencils or something. And I start to write, and I move the paper all around in circles. So I'm writing in all different directions, all of these ideas, so that nothing is linear and it's all different colors. And I'm writing it all out. And then I'm just following the impulses. And I'm like, I could do a thing like this, and I could do this, and I could do this. And then I start writing out like, I wonder, the question hitting me was like, if you were putting full-time energy into your business, how many of this class do you think you could run? And how many of this class do you think you could run? How many of this? Because I've been doing all these different things, but I would do one at a time because I only had, weekends and evenings to work on it. Well, if I was full-time, I could really reasonably do this, and I could really reasonably do this. How many people do you think you could get? And I'm getting all these like questions coming up in my brain. How many people do you think you could get really reasonably? Like, be really reasonable about it. And what do you think you would charge? Would you charge the same amount, or would you charge a little more? But like, be really reasonable about it. So I'm writing this all out, and pretty soon I'm like, oh, interesting. And then I like get a piece of paper and I kind of write it out a little more sequentially. And then I project out the numbers to be like a year. Like if I did how many in a year and how many, and I start going back and I'm like, wait a minute. This doesn't seem, that's too much. This total's looking too big. That's not realistic. Is it, well, how many, okay, so then I was like, let me bust my own myth here. How many hours does each one of these things take? Because I'm obviously being too rosy. So then I go through, do the hours. Well, this would take me about 3 hours. This would take me about this. And again, I'm coming out to 40 hours in a week, even trying to be really good in my projections. And I'm coming out to this dollar amount that I'm like, what? And I'm like, oh, I haven't taken out any expenses yet. Mm-hmm. And I keep waiting to bust my own myth here. So then I'm like, all right, well, take out this for taxes. And then let's take out, what other expenses would I have? Well, I'm gonna have to hire somebody to help me. So let's take out some money for marketing. And let's, what if I had to hire my assistant, who I've been doing a few hours a week helping me on some things, what if I had to hire a virtual assistant to do like lots of hours? Take that out, take that out. And I'm just slashing this number down. And finally I get to like, I can't possibly think of anything else. I have over exaggerated the expenses and I'm staring at a number and it is the exact same amount that I make in salary from the helicopter school. And it's now like 11 o'clock at night and I'm sitting on the floor, colored papers all around me, bawling my eyes out because not because I'm like taking this as a sign to leave my job, because I feel like my baby just grew up. And I feel so proud of this business that I like birthed out of my heart and just loved, not because I expected it to be anything or do anything. And unbeknownst to me, it's grown up into something that could be a thing. And here I am staring at what feels like the evidence that it's going to one day like walk on its own, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm so proud and I'm bawling. And I leave my mom this voice message because it's late on the mainland. And I'm crying and I leave her this whole message. My mom hears it. She's crying because she understands and she's so proud. And she plays it for my dad. This was the moment when she told me this that I really understood just how different, not just men and women, but like extremely sensitive, highly emotional creatures in my family. And then my dad, because he listened to this whole message, just like minutes long, and he looks at my mom real worried and he's like, "Is Cara happy or sad?" Doesn't get it, just oblivious. And my mom was like, "What?" Could not fathom. He's like, "Cara's crying. I'm worried. I don't understand. But is she happy?" My mom was like, "She's so happy. She's so proud. She's so emotional. She's feeling this like 27 different emotions." And he was like, "Happy, sad."
He's like, "It sounds like it's pretty good. I don't know why she's crying."
I don't know why she's crying. I must have to fix something. So then I call my boyfriend and I'm like, "Oh my gosh," and I'm telling him all this stuff. Oh, I leave him a voice message too. So the next day he's like, in his practical way, "Well, cool. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. You should quit your job and just move out here because I wanted to go live in the mountains and snowboard. And I've been saving up all this money to rent this cool house for 6 months. So just like move out here and learn to snowboard with me." And I was like, "Well, quitting my job? I didn't say my business was making this money. I said it has the potential. I'm not doing that. None of this is any of this. What are you talking about?" And he was like, "Oh, I thought you just said." In his mind, it was like obvious step, right? A to B. And I was like, "No, how dare you even suggest such a terrible thing?" And so then a little while later, and maybe he had just said, "Why don't you just quit your job and move out here?" And I was like, "No." A little while later, he's like, "All right, I'm doing it. I'm renting this house in the mountains, and I'm going to do this thing that I've been dreaming of for years and years, and I just want you by my side. And how can I?" I'm just trying to think, like, could I call your boss and offer him, like, what would I have to, like, bribe him with to let him, like, let you take more than one vacation this winter so you can be here more? And he'd been thinking those thoughts, and then I tell him this thing. So he was like, "Great, just quit. Just move here." And eventually a couple days go by and this conversation, and it becomes very clear that I am in fact going to leave my entire world and move across an ocean to go be with this guy I've been dating for 5 months. And I'm quitting my job, my security. I'm leaving my house. I'm leaving all my friends. I'm leaving my yoga classes I teach and my whole community. And I have built such a community and was, a small place, and people knew each other, and I had to really, really had a community. And I would teach classes in person on energy work, and I would do retreats and all the things. So I knew that I was supposed to do this. People were like, "You really know this guy's the one?" And I was like, "I don't know that, but I know for sure that I'm supposed to take this leap." Because that's been my higher self, my intuition has told me that so clearly. And I know that I have 2 jobs in this. One is caretake my fear, because there are going to be times when this is scary as fuck. And 2, follow the breadcrumbs. One foot in front of the other, every little piece that I am told, like with that intuition, every piece. Don't like rush ahead and be like, "I assume it's going to be da 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 da," but every little piece. And my boyfriend was amazing. And he was like, I'll help with the financial side of things. Like, I've already got the house. So, like, your basic needs are covered. You're not going to have to, like, pay a mortgage, and you're not going to have to do these things. So, we've got the house already rented. So, just come. So, all of a sudden my expenses went way down. I wasn't paying for all those, big mortgage and all the things. And my business started to grow, and it started to grow, and it started to grow, and eventually way blew past the dollar amount. That it took time, but eventually it did blow past that dollar amount that I thought that was the income I was getting from the helicopter school.
Yeah. That is like the most brilliant, beautiful story I've heard. Yeah, it's amazing. That's so inspirational because I feel like I left my job in solar a little over, I guess it's like 6 months now. And I've been, I mean, like I've been fighting with this, like, what am I supposed to do? And I feel like I've been pushing it so hard, but I've been forgetting that it can be easeful and I can let things happen easily. Yeah. But I remember you telling the story about, I don't know if this is the same house in the mountains for snowboarding, but you told this story about basically manifesting this dream house. Could you tell that story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was the other piece that I said there was a few days worth of things happening. So he wants to find this house. He's been saving for years. He wants to rent a house for 6 months for the whole season. And it's this dream to have all of his friends come, and everybody's going to snowboard and all the things, because he lives down in like the flatlands in Colorado. So he calls me and he's like so devastated. He's like, we waited too long. I kept tasking like all these different people with like helping me find the house. We've been working on it for months. We can't find anything. Here I have the money and I can't, there's nothing. Everything is taken. I've called, we've talked to every rental agency. We've checked everything. I've had multiple people helping me, and months and months and months. We've like driven and looked at places, and like everything has been taken. And I'm so sad we fucked up and like we missed our whole opportunity, and this whole season is toast. I mean, he is bummed.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think about how to like cheer him up. And Abraham has this practice called the what if game. And the what if game is all about like, we have this incredibly narrow view of how we think something could possibly happen. And his view was like, I can rent a house in the like Summit County, Breckenridge area, and you rent a house by going on Airbnb or rental agencies, right? Like this was the one narrow view. So I was like, oh, how do I help? And we play the what if game. We start to find what ifs that are like outside, maybe even way outside, so that you can just eke that like blinders open a little bit. So you go for like the way I play it, you go for the craziest thing you can think of, and then sometimes like it'll pry this open a little bit, your belief.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, what's the craziest solution I could think of? And I said, what if you took that money and then you went and traveled to the French Alps? I don't even know if they snowboard in the French Alps. I have no idea. I think there's Alps in France, but I just said this. And then you went there, and then you spent the whole winter snowboarding in like the French Alps. And he was like, huh. And he was kind of still in his thing. But then he calls me a couple hours later and he's like, okay, I got it. I was like, what? He's like, well, I took what you said. Again, it's like, man, fix it energy, right? Took what you said. And I was playing the what if game. So in my mind, I was like, obviously no one would do that, right? And he's like, I started researching, and where actually has really amazing snowboarding is Korea. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, the Olympics and all the things. So he starts researching all over the world, places where you can snowboard and things. And he's looking at houses and he's looking at things. He's like, I just need a really good internet connection so I can keep my business going, and da, da, da. And he's like, actually, we could go. Because then I'd gone on to say, like, what if you went and spent a month in each place and all these things? And I was like making this whole like, well, he grabbed a hold of it. And he was like, yeah. And then he was like, you're my woman. Let's go. So he was like, quit your job, travel the world with me, and let's snowboard. I don't like snow. I don't know how to snowboard. I've never been on a board, surfboard, skateboard. One time I was on a surfboard, never been on a skateboard. I was 37 and I was like, you want me to learn how to snowboard? What? I don't ski. I don't do cold. Sounds really similar to when I moved to Hawaii, right? So, but he's like, I mean, here's this amazing man of my dreams. And he's like, come travel the world with me. And I'm like, what? And he's like, I saved up the money. Like, I got it. Let's go. I checked. We can go rent these places. We could do these things. Da, 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 da. And I was like, let me think about it. And I talked to a friend of mine. I was like, went to teach my yoga class that night. And I was just spinning in this like decision of like this crazy. And I kind of like told her about it in the parking lot. And she was like, well, Cara, would you ever regret doing that? And I was like, I can't think of a worst case scenario where I would regret doing something that big and crazy and wild and amazing. Let's say our relationship blows up and we're not meant to be together. We wind up hating each other. Like, would I regret going and having that experience? I really can't think of one where I would. So then I called him and I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing this. And then, and this is all happening, this is a couple of days. I'm like, I'm not ready to even like tell people. I'm going to have to figure out giving notice at this business that like I've been trying to work myself out of a job for 12 years so that I could become invaluable or become replaceable because I was irreplaceable. I've been working to become replaceable all these years, trying to like teach people. And what wound up happening is as he's checking all these places, he's realizing that the time zones aren't going to work with his business. How am I going to be able to run my business in the time zones for the places that we're going to go? And now he's starting to run up against roadblocks for this idea that we had. And then he gets a call from one of the rental agencies and they're like, hey, you know that awesome house you went and looked at 5 months ago that rented and has been rented because someone booked it like 4 months in advance for the entire winter? Well, the season starts in like a couple weeks and the rental just fell through and that house is available. And he was like, are you kidding me? This is all the span of a couple days from the time we played the what if game to like, right? And so after that, oh, I forgot there was one more manifestation piece I did in there. I hung up the phone with him that night after we played the what if game, which he was not into, by the way, at first. I got out my journal and I was like, I know how to help. And I began to write out manifestations for him having this amazing season and finding this amazing house and all these things, like exactly the best case scenario I could think of. And I wrote it and I had no resistance to this because it's not me. I wasn't including myself in this. He has the best time. And I just flowed this whole creative thing. The next day he had said to, maybe this was the course of 48 hours. The next day he said, oh, sorry, I'm messing up the timeline. I did that practice after he started hitting the roadblocks. That's what it was. So the next day he calls, he's like, let's do it. I've got a plan. Come with me. Finally, I say yes, like that night or a day later. He starts going into all the research, starts hitting the roadblocks, tells me he's hitting the roadblocks that night. I do the practice. The next day he gets the call. That's the sequence. The next day he gets the call saying that house is available. And he's like, what witchy voodoo did you do?
Yeah.
And from then on in our relationship, whenever he hit any kind of issue in business, he would be like, I just need you to do your witchy hoodoo. He had this whole like hysterical thing he would call it. Like, I don't know, but it was really funny. All of these things. I need you to do your like medicine man hoodoo witchy stuff and fix this problem for me. And I'd be like, got it, no problem. He's like, this agency, this thing, whatever, this business thing, like we're getting sued, like whatever it is, here, do your witchy stuff, fix this for me. We did. We went and lived in like this ridiculous house. Ridiculous. I had a whole room that was like a snow globe. 3 sides and a ceiling, all glass. And it was on the edge of a hill, like mountain. And that room, so the house was built like, for all your builders, the house was built like on stilts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that room was an extra addition, like a sunroom on extra stilts, way out over. So you'd stand in it and kind of get vertigo looking down.
Oh my God.
And so when it was blizzarding, you were in a snow globe and it would blizzard around you.
That is so cool.
It was so cool.
That's a massive manifestation, Cara.
It was pretty awesome. It was pretty awesome.
We've been going for a while, but I have one more question. So, you've become a mom, and I just want to ask you about what that experience has been like. And I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of recalibration that comes with, like, okay, now I have a baby and I have a business and I have a family. And what is that like, and how have you been juggling it, I guess?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm still in the process of, we're like not quite 2 years in, and I'm still in the process of finding the, like, how is this all going to fit together? Um, and I'm trying to give myself grace and be patient and gentle. One of the best things that I did at some point early postpartum, I think, I sat down and I was like, wait a minute, I'm pretty driven and I have a really, really high work ethic. And that impulse pressure that I felt to like jump back into business was really high, but I had a lot of recovery to do. And we had a really challenging postpartum in the first like 4 months. And I remember at some point in there sitting down and asking myself this question, like, what are my priorities right now?
Yeah.
And what do I really need? And what are my real priorities? Like outside of outside expectations, outside of what does my business need, which was a big pressure. What do my clients need? What do but really me? And so the priorities as I listed them were my son, be the best mom, take the best care of him. And the very next priority was self-care, like actually taking really, really good care of myself and getting to a place where I could, like, focusing on my physical well-being, the way that I feel and look, the way that my overall health and recovering from birth and postpartum and cesarean and all the things, my mental well-being, like it was a whole, under that was a big subcategory. So getting to be like healthy and happy and feel good in my body again. And then number 3 was my relationship. And I lumped in with that, which was actually could have been like number 4, friendships, because I desperately needed friends. And we hadn't been living in Maui that long, new island. So building a community, getting support, being around other moms, having friends, like all of that, I lumped those into the 2. They could have been 1. And then way down at the bottom was like work.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, now after number 1, after the baby, how much energy do I have? And it was like almost nothing.
Yeah.
Crap.
Right.
Because there's a big list of priorities. And if I was really honest with myself, work was at the bottom. And it's a priority, but it was at the bottom. So I have taken a very, very, very slow maternity leave, like continuing to do my business throughout all of this, but in a really part-time way.
Yeah.
And I have to continually like rein myself in from getting stressed about that when I start to, and be like, no, 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 no. This is a very short phase of life. And you are going to look back and be so grateful that you spent this time taking care of your baby and yourself, and your business will be okay. And like, because that feels like the OG baby, right? And so you feel like you're neglecting one baby to take care of another one.
Right.
So it's ongoing, but it's working.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, I've noticed how intentional you've been about like slowly, what you're comfortable with, hosting things, like slowly ramping up again, because it seems like it's the things that you teach and teaching classes, I feel like it is nourishing to you also. And I could tell that you were like craving it, but I really thought it was a really good example to new moms, like getting to watch you make the transition and do things at your own pace and be 100 like 100% comfortable. And there were times where like I could see you struggling with figuring out priorities for yourself, but
Yeah.
being okay with that. Yeah, I think what I'm saying is making sense.
Yes, thank you. That's really, really, really reassuring to hear.
Well, we're at an hour and almost 35 minutes. Could you tell us about where we can work with you and about your offerings?
Yeah. So my website is caraviana.com, Vianacaravana. And there are a million free resources through the website. I like to do lots and lots of free things and put them out into the world. There's meditations and recordings of calls that we've done and workshops and healings and all sorts of things. And if you'll get on the email list, you'll automatically get sent a bunch of stuff, and then you'll be aware of every time we do another free workshop, another event. There's just so much good stuff coming. I think we're going to do a retreat this year. We did one last year and it went really good. And I say think because, again, I'm always in this, like, having to like rein in my business side that was like, let's do everything and really see like what's actually going to fit well here. So I'm pretty sure that's going to happen this year. And I'm hoping we're going to do Master Your Magic, which is the big intuitive development course, coming up in the fall. If people want to learn more about that, they can always just email and I can give specific details too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I feel like this was a really, really good first podcast. I'm in like my little makeshift studio at my parents' house and everything, but I feel like this is a really lovely conversation and I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. So fun for me. I feel so honored I got to be the first guest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll bring you back eventually, maybe like 6 months or something. Yeah. And I'll be feeling more comfortable too. So, okay.
It'll be so great to see what directions you've gone and what you've built.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.